and white trash talking.
Hello, everyone. This is White Trash Talking. I'm Doug Johnson. And before I begin, I would like to ask you to like and subscribe. Don't forget to do that. So today I want to talk about Robert Gates and his role in maintaining the military-industrial complex and in maintaining and promoting the ideology around that. And so who is Robert Gates? I'll show you a picture of him here, sitting down with Margaret Brennan. This is about 10 days ago on the show Face the Nation. Okay, so that's Robert Gates. He was the Secretary of Defense from 2006 to 2011. And before that, he worked for the CIA, and he was the Director of Central Intelligence for a while. And he currently sits on a number of corporate boards, many in fact. A couple of them are SAIC, which is Science Applications International Corporation, and that's a major defense contractor. They provide engineering and IT services to military and intelligence. He also sits on the board of Vote Here, which is involved in cryptographic technologies. It's connected to intelligence and military applications. Sits on the board of Fidelity Investments, which is invested directly in defense stocks. When those stocks go up, he makes a lot of money. And he sits on the board of Parker Drilling Company, and this intersects with military strategy in various geostrategic locations around the world, including Syria, Ukraine, places where there are oil and there's interests in rebuilding after the war, developing oil pipelines, and so on. So he sits on other boards, but these four directly relate to war spending. And also the person interviewing him here, Margaret Brennan, who works for CBS. Well, CBS is owned by Paramount, formerly Viacom, and they're also connected in various ways to the military-industrial complex. The major investors in Viacom are directly related. They have an interest in maintaining that, and they exert influence over Viacom. So that's how it works. I'll talk more about the military-industrial complex in a minute, but that's Robert Gates. And I want to show him in this interview.
The Middle East may be one place
Excuse me. I want to show him in this interview and break it down step by step and deconstruct the ideology of what's going on here. Okay, before I play that interview, I just want to make it clear about what I mean about ideology. So this interview takes place with the understanding that Iran is the bad guy, the US is the good guy. But they never explore that. They never ask questions around that. The interviewer avoids talk of any history with Iran, and it's just assumed that Iran is evil. And, you know, it's just not true. If you look at the history between the US and Iran, the US meddled in Iran's affairs going back to the 1950s. They overthrew Iranians' democratically elected president, Mossadegh, and they installed the Shah of Iran, and he was in power for over 20 years, and he was brutal. Many people disappeared, and the Iranians know of the US's role in that, and they were very, very angry about it. In 1979, there was an uprising against the embassy workers in Iran, and they captured some of them and held them for over 400 days, and then they were released. And since that time, the US has never forgiven Iran. That's largely what's behind this idea that Iran is an evil state. There's been a couple of incidences when Hezbollah has attacked US soldiers, one time in '83 in Beirut, Lebanon, another time in Saudi Arabia, again by Hezbollah. And they say, well, Iran supports Hezbollah, so Iran is behind this. Iran is evil. But Yes, Iran did create Hezbollah and supports Hezbollah, but probably not to the extent that people suggest. And they're doing it for a very good reason, for self-preservation. I mean, Israel had attacked Lebanon in 1983, and Iran was very scared about this, and they're trying to stop it. They're trying to protect themselves. Look what happens if you can't resist their power. Ask the Gazans. They'll tell you that's what's in store for Iran, and they know it. So they're trying to stop it. So they've supported Hezbollah, but Iran itself directly has not confronted the U.S., whereas the U.S. has imposed virtually a blockade against Iran for many, many years, cut off their medicine, their oil exports. They've cut off their banking, access to banking, and food imports, and just devastated their economy, and they are hurting. So that's the context here. So this good-bad dichotomy that Gates talks about, that's all part of the ideology. So let me begin. Let me begin with the interview. Here it is.
The Middle East may be one place where there are some real opportunities and possibilities. It's a place to do business for China, for the United States, for everybody else. The actions of Israel post the October 7th massacre by Hamas has really changed the strategic equation in the Middle East. Because
okay, again, he's referencing that talking point that's repeated over and over in the media by the Zionists, the U.S. government, the attacks of October 7th. And the war didn't begin on October 7th. It began in 1948 when Israel committed an atrocity and drove 800,000 people, Palestinians, out of their land, and many of them ended up in Gaza as refugees. Many went to Jordan and elsewhere, but that's where the war started, and Israel has maintained a brutal occupation since '67, and it's a horrible conditions for Palestinians, and they're resisting. On October 7th, they broke out of their prison, because Gaza is an open-air prison. That's what happened. That's what I would do if I was unfairly imprisoned. I would try to break out. I would do what I could. That's what they did. Every couple of years, Israel goes in and does what they call mowing the lawn. They slaughter a couple thousand people, then come back out, and that's been going on for years and years. And they deny them food, energy resources, and just the freedom to travel. They can't leave. They're in a prison. All right? So let's continue.
Because Iran has been dramatically weakened. Iran's in a very weak place now, and if there is an opportunity to do a deal on nuclear, this is it.
You didn't really like the Obama-era nuclear deal with Iran, but President Trump is trying something that may be somewhat similar. What do you think has to be in it for it to really be a success?
Iran really has to stop their nuclear program.
Okay, so he says that they need to stop their nuclear program. Well, this has all been negotiated prior to Trump's administration. The JCPOA, which is a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was brokered by Obama, and US, UK, Russia, China, and Germany, European Union was involved in that. And it's an agreement that Iran would not enrich uranium beyond 3.7%, whereas 90% enrichment is needed for a nuclear weapon. 3.67% is for nuclear energy, which all the signatories to this agreement agreed that Iran was due, to power their country. And Trump came along unilaterally and abolished that during his first term. And so he withdrew. So naturally, Iran just went on with their enrichment. They weren't bound to stick to that agreement. The U.S. withdrew and imposed sanctions, which were the bargaining chip. the U.S. had relieved the sanctions in exchange for the JCPOA, but then he withdrew and imposed the sanctions again. So Iran just said, okay, we're going to do what we're going to do. That's fair, all right? But Robert Gates doesn't talk about any of that. Again, you can't talk about the history here and maintain this ideology that Iran is evil. So he avoids it, and the interviewer doesn't ask him. All right, let's continue.
Enrichment entirely, and they have to give up
entirely, not
entirely.
just highly enriched, all enrichment.
Entirely, and if they want to have a civil nuclear program, they need to import the uranium, the enriched uranium, to do that. But they need to get rid of the stockpile.
Would you oppose an Israeli strike with U.S. support on Iran's nuclear program?
The problem that I've had with a strike on the Iranian nuclear program is that it buys you a year or two. You're not going to be able to destroy, short of, as long as you're using conventional weapons, you cannot get at the very deeply buried parts of the Iranian nuclear program.
Okay, so what bothers him is it might not be effective unless you use nuclear weapons. You're not talking about right and wrong here, or the rights of Iran to have energy, nuclear energy, which is what their whole program is about. There's never been any indication, and they're inspected all the time. And all the inspectors say the same thing. They've passed all the tests. They do not have a nuclear weapons program, period. All right? So, but you know who does? Israel. Israel has nuclear weapons. They're undeclared. Israel, unlike Iran, is not a signatory to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. So who's in the wrong here? It's not Iran. Again, Robert Gates won't touch that. All right, let's continue.
We're starting to see some points of friction with the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government in particular. Are we at the point now where President Trump needs to publicly be clear that the war in Gaza has to end and withhold U.S. support if it doesn't?
I think it would be a very heavy political lift for the president to say he's going to cut off military supplies to Israel.
Okay, so again, I want to jump in. No, he says it would be a heavy lift to stop the military supplies to Israel. You know, people always say, and I've said it myself, it would just take one phone call by Trump to stop this. It would take one phone call by Trump to stop the war in Ukraine. And, you know, it's occurred to me recently that actually, you know, maybe not. Again, Robert Gates is referencing the military-industrial complex, which is deeply entrenched in the U.S. economy. And this is why the U.S. is a permanent war state, because, you know, he's talking about the things that run the economy, which is the war expenditures, the defense budget, which is in the trillions, and the defense contractors. You have weapons developers, cybersecurity firms, logistical support. The major contractors are Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing Defense. And plus, the U.S. sells weapons to 103 countries in the world, and there's a whole lobbying industry around this. Everyone makes money, their families, you know. The country, a certain small segment of the country basks in this wealth that's generated by war. Plus the corporate media. I mean, Paramount owns CBS, and I talked about that earlier. Plus you have private military contractors, a lot of people, but again, it's a small minority, but they're well paid, they're deeply entrenched in what's called the deep state, and they, like Robert Gates, benefit from war. So yeah, it's a heavy lift. Very, very interesting wording there. Trump could do it, but he might not survive. Let's put it that way. I mean, I think JFK had similar ideas about Vietnam. He didn't survive. I'm not saying that was a reason, but, you know, I don't think Trump would survive if he tried to stop military shipment to Israel. It's too much allied against him. All right, let's continue.
unless they stop in Gaza. I think he can say a lot of things in terms of putting pressure on Netanyahu to stop the war. He can put forward proposals on how humanitarian assistance and other things might go forward.
Is there a cost to this ongoing support of such a bloody war, given the projections from U.S. intelligence about the long-term recruitment of among terror groups around the world because of the devastation?
Is there a cost to this war? I think you should ask the Gazans. But what this interview demonstrates is that doesn't matter. You're going to listen. Robert Gates is not going to mention the suffering of the Gazans, the deaths of babies who are split in half, beheaded, losing their parents, orphaned, family after family slaughtered in their homes. It's a genocide. And then the question is outrageous. Is there a cost? Let's listen to his answer to the cost.
I think there is a cost. I think it does provide a basis for radicalization in the region.
Radicalization in the region. That's done by Israel. That's done by the U.S. We're the radicals. People that go kill other people indiscriminately, mass slaughter, bomb, destroy, kill, openly declare that you want to commit genocide and wipe the people off the land. That's radical. They are the radical people. The U.S. are radical people. The Gazans aren't. The people in that area aren't. They're just trying to get on with their lives. Let's continue.
But it is interesting to me that you're not hearing much out of the Gulf Arabs and others.
You're not hearing much out of the Gulf Arabs. This is a human issue. First of all, the people in the region, the people, are outraged. You think that the Egyptians don't want to get in there and save the Palestinians? They're ready to fight. You think the Jordanians, which are half the population of Jordan, is Palestinian refugees, you think they don't want to get in there and fight? They're clamoring to do. The Gulf Arabs, the neighboring countries are outraged by this. The whole world's outraged. But the leaders who are imposed by the U.S., supported by the U.S., the puppet regimes, aren't going to speak out. Do you think the king of Jordan is going to say anything? No. You think Sisi in Egypt is going to speak out against the U.S.? No. No, that would be the end of him. So the people are outraged. But they don't have a voice. Their voice is not represented in world opinions. People like Robert Gates don't care about their voices. All right, so there's just a snippet. That's a 3-minute segment of a longer interview that's absolutely jam-packed of ideology. These talking points are just reiterated again and again and again until it's deeply embedded in the American mind, because they're the ones feeding on this shit. And it's like an entity. You think of Iran and you immediately think, oh, terrorists, bad guys. And they're not. They're good people. They're peaceful people. And if you laugh at what I'm saying, it's because you've been indoctrinated. They're not causing trouble. We are. The Americans are. The Israelis are. We're the murderers, not them. All right. I guess, that's all I wanted to say. This is just a snippet of ideology. I invite you to take a more critical view of these kinds of shows, which are just jam-packed, and their purpose by both the spokesperson like Robert Gates, he's a spokesperson for the military-industrial complex, and for his boards that he sits on that are cashing in on this, and then the major networks that also cash in on this. So that's all I have to say. If you agree, let me know. If you disagree, please let me know. Leave a note. Challenge me on my ideas. I could even interview you if you want to be interviewed. All right. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.